Breaking news. The global significance of Russia's blockade of Ukraine's grain exports during the conflict. Concerns about global food security have been allayed thanks to agreements the United Nations and Turkey brokered with Ukraine and Russia to allow food and fertilizer to get from the warring nations to areas of the world where millions are going hungry. The dangers, however, are growing. Moscow has ratcheted up its rhetoric, saying it may not extend the deal that expires on Monday unless its demands are met. These include removing obstacles for Moscow's own agricultural shipments. More than half of the 32.8 million metric tons, 36.2 million tons, of food exported from Ukraine since last August have gone to developing countries, including those receiving relief from the World Food Programme, thanks to the Black Sea Grain Initiative. UNFAO chief economist Maximo Torero warned that if the agreement is not renewed, you will have a new spike for sure, in food prices. How markets react will have a significant impact on how long that spike lasts. The good news is that there is enough grain in the world to go around, so the price of global food commodities like wheat is not expected to rise significantly in the near future. However, high food prices at home compound the problem in many nations. Take a look at the historic agreement and its global implications below. So, what exactly is the deal with the grain? 3 of Ukraine's Black Sea ports had been closed for months after Moscow's invasion, but in August 2022, Ukraine and Russia signed separate agreements to reopen them. They helped move Russian food products even as Western countries imposed sanctions. The people of Africa, the Middle East, and some regions of Asia rely on the cheap food that is exported from both countries. Ukraine is a major exporter of corn, and Russia exports a lot of fertilizer, both of which are essential to the food production process. Stoppages in grain exports from Ukraine, often called the breadbasket of the world, have contributed to a worldwide shortage and driven up the price of cereal. One major agricultural producer is waging war on another major agricultural producer, said Caitlin Welsh, director of the Global Food and Water Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. This conflict is affecting the cost of food and fertilizers for millions of people around the world. The agreement guarantees the safety of vessels using Ukrainian ports. Russian, Ukrainian, United Nations, and Turkish officials check ships to make sure they are only carrying food and not weapons that could aid either side. The agreement, which was meant to be renewed every 4 months, was hailed as a ray of hope during the war and has been extended 3 times, each time for only 2 months due to Russia's claims that its exports were being impeded. What have we gained from it? After hitting record highs after Russia invaded Ukraine, the deal helped bring down global prices of food commodities like wheat. Millions of people were pushed into poverty and increased food insecurity in already vulnerable nations as a result of the war's impact on global food and energy prices. After the agreement was reached, Ukraine once again became the World Food Programme's second largest supplier of grain, allowing 800,000 tons, 725,000 metric, of humanitarian food aid to leave the country and be distributed to countries in danger of starvation such as Ethiopia, Afghanistan, and Yemen. According to John Stoppert, Senior Manager of Environment and Trade for the International Chamber of Shipping, which represents 80% of the world's commercial fleet, it is a pretty unique phenomenon to have 2 warring parties and 2 intermediaries agree to establish this sort of corridor to get humanitarian products, which is ostensibly what this is, out to markets that need it most. Why the deal is in danger. Putin said Russia would not renew the grain deal unless the West keeps the promises given to us. We have repeatedly shown goodwill to extend this deal, Putin told reporters on Thursday. Simply put, enough is enough. According to him, agricultural exports have been hampered by sanctions on the Russian Agricultural Bank and restrictions on shipping and insurance. Western allies have assured companies that food and fertilizer are exempt from the sanctions, but this has made some wary of doing business with Russia. It's not uncommon in situations like this for countries to use whatever levers they have to try and get sanctions regimes changed, said Simon Evanet, a professor of international trade and economic development at the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. A spokesperson for UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said that he wrote to Russian President Vladimir Putin this week proposing simpler transactions through the Agricultural Bank. Welsh argued that Russian claims that its agriculture sector is suffering are countered by the reality of increased production and exports since the beginning of the conflict. The United States Department of Agriculture predicts that Russian wheat exports will hit a new record of 47.5 million metric tons in the 2023-2024 trade year, up from the previous record of 45.5 million metric tons in the 2022-2023. Who will be impacted? The International Rescue Committee has referred to the grain deal as a lifeline for the 79 countries and 349 million people on the front lines of food insecurity. Shashwat Sarif, the group's regional emergency director for East Africa, explained that the region has experienced severe drought and flooding, destroying crops for 2.2 million people who rely on farming for a living. In a statement, he emphasized how important it was to extend the agreement for a longer period of time in order to establish stability and predictability. Analysts predict that food importing countries like Lebanon and Egypt will have to look for new suppliers outside of the Black Sea region, which will increase prices due to greater transportation costs. For nations already struggling to make ends meet as they pay in dollars for food imports, this would be an additional financial burden. World Food Programme chief economist Arif Hussain told reporters that if the grain deal isn't renewed, food will be less affordable for low-income countries and people. So, what's the deal with Ukraine? Before the war, 75% of Ukraine's grain exports went through the Black Sea, which was crucial to the country's economy. Even if the grain deal collapses, it can still ship its food to Europe via land or river, though this has angered farmers in nearby countries due to the lower capacity of land and river shipments compared to sea shipments. However, the Ukrainian Grain Association hopes to double monthly exports along that route to 4 million metric tons by sending more grain down the Danube to Romania's Black Sea ports. The USDA predicts that Ukraine will export 10.5 million metric tons of wheat next year, which is down by more than 40% from the country's pre-war average of 16.5 million metric tons. Ukraine has blamed Russia for a drop in food exports from a high of 4.2 million metric tons in October to 2 million in June, saying that Russia is slowing down inspections of ships and preventing new ones from joining the initiative. In what other ways is the food supply impacted? A lot of people aren't eating because of the effects of the pandemic, economic collapse, drought, and other climate factors. According to a report released in July by the Food and Agriculture Organization, 45 countries are in desperate need of food aid. Most of these countries, including Haiti, the Ukraine, Venezuela, and a number of nations across Africa and Asia, are experiencing food insecurity due to high domestic food prices. Even though drought can be a problem for major grain suppliers, experts predict that other countries will produce enough to make up for Ukraine's shortfall. Wheat exports from Europe and Argentina are on the rise, and corn from Brazil had a record-breaking year. Wheat and corn markets have adapted incredibly rapidly, according to Peter Meyer, head of grain analytics at S&P Global Commodity Insights.